Wow, guys, I hope you dug that. And I liked hearing from a new voice, too. I know we barely scratched the surface trying to talk about material from a 40-part series and then some, but for me, I just really enjoy pointing out that there have been more critics of these things we take for granted than anybody should be comfortable with. And I asked Sylvia about a lot of things she probably can't know, and she was totally willing to admit that, which I think is a great thing for her journalistic integrity. But you guys know, as we point out the flaws and identify the holes, we usually become more open-minded to the possibilities the truth could entail. And with something like this, it hinges on a few things. Of course, I think a lot of us are open to the rough idea that there was an ancient, advanced culture, Atlantis and Hyperborea perhaps, and maybe the cedars of knowledge we've heard about were Caucasian-looking people from these civilizations. Maybe they were escaping the destruction of their own culture from these parasites, or maybe natural disasters as well. And maybe they spread out and integrated into less civilized cultures to pass on their knowledge and rebuild their world. A struggle they've been having ever since. Maybe this was a back and forth that was finally laid to rest with the Reformation and the European expansion and the Inquisition and colonialism and the Spanish conquest. Is it possible? Could these have all been aspects of one campaign? Could it be that something more epic and not so distant was hidden away over that period of time? Could the genie have been put back in the bottle just a few hundred years ago? Is a campaign of this magnitude feasible? I think it is. I think it could have been done, and maybe cultures we think just died out or disappeared were slaughtered and then moved further into the past. It sounds weird, but we're faced with so many things that don't make sense. What happened to that true psychedelic basis for religions in ancient times? What happened to all those megalithic sites? What's the deal with all the artifacts and clay pots and kids' toys from the past that have dinosaurs on them? We talked about a few of them in the Plus show, but they're there. And maybe something happened just a few thousand years ago that destroyed these advanced cultures, radically altered the planet, killed off the larger reptiles that may have been normal at one time, and caused the catalyst to build all these underground tunnels and cities around the planet. I mean, hell, just realizing that humans could have walked with dinosaurs. And I'm not talking about creationist stuff. In fact, a lot of these guys and the flat earth guys are going in this direction that dinosaurs never existed, that it's all a fabrication. But I've seen artifacts that depict dinosaurs, and places like the Smithsonian won't display them, and I think there's a reason for that. And it's not because they were made up. But even this notion that dinosaurs and megamammals lived with man in the moderate past is enough to justify the huge tunnel systems. And we've even heard of giants too. How would you hide from man-eating giants in the ancient Americas? Most likely underground. I don't know. And I'm no expert, clearly. But when Sylvia was talking about the Arctic regions and the Sahara Desert in the Plus show, it really struck a chord with me. I'm becoming more open to a radically recent cataclysm, and with that, it's easier to understand how a parasitic elite could dominate humanity into such a position of servitude and ignorance as we're in today. Maybe this manipulation hasn't lasted throughout humanity's timeline, but humanity's timeline has been altered to reflect that it has, and with it, the psychological acceptance that this is how it's always been, and probably always will be, is just the icing on the cake. Ask yourself if you think this is possible. Before the time of the internet or the telephone or the car or the plane, could a powerful group amass enough resources to pull this off? Well, we talked about the Roman Empire being a fabrication, and how interesting we're told that it lasted from like 700 BC to 1453, 64 years before the Reformation. So if you have a period of time where you want to rewrite history and establish a certain dominance, you pretty much have to leave the last 60 years alone because people are still alive. But 64 years is about the time you could start making history up. But in the meantime, 1478, we have the Spanish Inquisition. 1492, we have Columbus in America. A few short years later, 1518, Cortez in Mexico. Could this be all part of the same elite and the same campaign, the same parasite making sure that their way is the only way, their history is the only history? I think it's possible. I mean, just 200 years from then, we have World War I, which really was just a conflict between ruling elite who were in the same family. They were cousins. So how did that happen? How was that established? Honestly, guys, I'm just a stoner out of my depth here. I'm not a historian. And I'd like to talk to a historian open-minded enough to consider these ideas, but usually when someone studies something for a long time, they put more and more stock in it, except those radical few who are then marginalized by the system. Either way, I think it's amazing stuff. A global coup of humanity meant to wipe out knowledge of our peaceful past, the enlightened leaders of Atlantis, and the knowledge of this parasitic invasion that still rules us from the shadows. I mean, that speaks to my core. Of course, it parallels with other ideas that are well known to conspiracy enthusiasts, but with a sour, fruity twist. Of course, we get into so much more in the second hour: the origins of humanity, money as a control tool, secret societies, the underground cities and tunnels, ancient maps, the hollow earth, the recent winterization of the polar regions, the idea that the Sahara Desert might not be as natural as we think. These kind of geographical oddities, to me, are the most fascinating. We also talked about dinosaurs and mammoths, the power of manifestation, prophetic dreams, and a good chunk about ayahuasca. All good stuff, and you know this. You've been listening to this show long enough to know it's a good one, and that I'm fairly consistent, so just sign up already. What better time than the beginning of a new year? Go ahead and treat yourself. You know, I will say Sylvier's work is something I was looking into, and I even brought up Fomenko's work with Crow the last time we talked to him, but on the Plus forums, she was suggested a couple of times, and I really have to give a shout out to one of the Plus people, specifically Old Chuck Fort, for helping me out with this one. Clearly he was familiar with her work, and I asked for his input, and he really did help me flesh out some of the things I was going to ask her. Much appreciated, man. Let me know if you want your dollar back for this one. Sure, we've corrected little things like the heavily circulated lie that Columbus discovered America, but what if the historical deceptions are wilder than most of us ever imagined? That is what today's show is about. And my guest, Sylvier Ivanoa, is someone I'm lucky to have found, and hopefully you guys will love. But on her YouTube channel, she has a series called When the Atlantis and Hyperborea Survivors Wake Up. And she details a history that is radically different than our own, and she does a lot to back it up. In this show, we talk about Russian researcher Anatoly Fomenko's work and his book series. You know I like my Russian researchers. But his work also plays a huge role in Sylvier's series. And she really was one of the first to really grasp the work and incorporate it into something for an English audience. I guess they've translated his books now, but even still, in Russian there are 7 and in English there are 4. But Sylvier and Fomenko point out a lot of the same flaws, but come to pretty radically different conclusions. Sometimes it was hard to separate the two because I didn't have a lot to go on when setting this up, but really, as difficult as it can make my job, this is what I like. I've been looking into alternative stuff for a long time, and it's awesome just to hear from someone pulling mostly from non-English sources, just to help us peer behind the language barrier and see what alternative researchers outside of our own bubble are finding. And so much of the evidence is visual, I highly suggest you check out the series, but this THC is a great primer, I think, and even when talking about ayahuasca, which she has quite a bit of experience with, it comes from a different perspective than the other voices I hear talking about it. And even that is interesting to me, so let's just dive into it. One of my new favorite researchers, Sylvier Ivanoa.
It's a pleasure to be on your show. Thank you.
Oh, no problem. Thank you. There are very few guests I could have on to even talk about this stuff, so I feel very lucky to have you because I find this so interesting, and anytime we're talking about a manipulation that reworks things we've taken as a given or maybe hadn't considered to this extreme, it can be hard to wrap our heads around. So what should we say about this new chronology movement to start off? What exactly is being suggested here?
It is being suggested that the entire historical paradigm that is being taught in schools needs a very serious revision. Probably the history as we know it is correct for more or less the last 200 years. And before that, it's heavily edited. And the more we dive into antiquity, the further we go into the bygone ages, the more manipulated it gets.
Mm-hmm. How do we know this? Well, it seems like a big can of worms. What led people to come to this conclusion that something was off with the timeline?
Well, actually, Anatoly Fomenko, he discovered it absolutely by chance. He's an academic, but mathematician. He was not in the field of history at all. And he was researching a physics topic, why the moon was behaving very oddly in the past. He decided that is strange. He could not believe that a few hundred years ago the moon was rotating in a completely different manner. And while researching why that could be so, he discovered that it it wasn't the case. The moon was always rotating in the same fashion, but physics were taking for granted that certain data for the lunar eclipses must be correct because they come from old Chinese books. So he discovered that the books were interpreted in a wrong fashion, and then he noticed that this suggests that the entire timeline should be different. If that's different, that means that the historic events that are also placed in time according to similar assumption must be wrong as well. And when he started researching the matter in more detail, he was surprised for himself. He could not believe the results in the beginning himself. And then he went more and more into history and embarked on this huge project of compiling a new timeline. And in the beginning, as he says himself, he could not believe it himself, how different was the reality from what we are told in school. But my series about the survivors of Hyperborea and Atlantis is only partially based on his work. There are some major differences. And to start with, he doesn't even mention Hyperborea and Atlantis. He says everything started 1,000 years ago, with which this is one of the very few points where I don't agree with him. But I still believe that he is the most reliable source of what we call ancient history and medieval history and recent history. But as far as history of the extreme antiquity, he does not touch this point at all.
Okay. Yeah, I thought that was really interesting too. But it is important to note this thing with the moon eclipses. I think that's really compelling because apparently when you look back at the historical record of the recording of the eclipses, this guy, Robert Newton, said the moon was behaving very strange in the past. And that's because he didn't think to change the calendar. He just assumed, oh, well, the calendar's right, and these moon eclipses are way off, so that must mean the moon was behaving differently. But instead, what Fomenko did is actually say, well, no, the calendar is man-made, so let's look at the calendar and try to straighten that out in accordance with the information about the eclipse, and that's where a lot of this manipulation comes from. I think that's a fascinating thing because it gives some evidence to why this could be true.
Well, this was just the starting point. Later on, he found even more evidences, and he compiled many volumes with such evidences. He and his colleague Nosovsky, they also did travel to various places and found lots of confirmations for what they couldn't even believe themselves in the beginning.
So talk to us about a little bit of the evidence. It seems like a lot of the original documents that are supposed to support a lot of old history, it seems like they might be fabricated.
Yes, partially or completely. And it mainly happened during the time of the Reformation. Certain monks were given a task to correct the old books. And, they did their work. They corrected the books to suit the new paradigm into which the humanity was channeled, was made to walk in. The new paradigm in which the humanity was artificially placed.
Right, the Reformation, and I guess we know about this period in history, but it itself is manipulated, right? I mean, the suggestion for this new chronology is that it was a lot more bloody and a lot more aggressive with spreading this new narrative, right? I mean, that's the idea.
Yes, the Reformation nowadays is, if you ask a person on the street, he will tell you it's some sort of a religious movement. They didn't want church bells, organ singing, and things like that. They wanted to translate the Bible into more understandable language, but in reality it was an extremely bloody war. Many nations in Europe had a large percentage of their populations simply wiped out. And apparently it was extremely turbulent. Even till date, the mainstream historians cannot even provide sensible reasons why people were killing each other. But yet they're assuring us that it was like that with such a confidence as if they saw it with their own eyes.
Yeah, and I was also surprised to learn about a long history of intelligent scholars who have noticed these flaws. I mean, even Isaac Newton had doubts, right?
Yes, he was still closer to the time when the true history was more or less known. He had access to much more genuine documents than we do, because the cleanup of the genuine old books was an ongoing task through the centuries. Now, most of them are gone missing, but at Newton's time, this was not the case. Still now and then you could get hold of real old books. Yes.
Yeah, they've done a better job over time, gotten more refined at locking down that old information and making sure there's no holes in the story. I wrote down a couple of descriptions from your video of the scholars who have noticed this and have been discredited, just so people can get an idea that this isn't just one or two fringe researchers. There's this guy, Gunnar Heinsohn, lived in Germany, studied philosophy, economics, and sociology in Berlin, obtained his PhD in 1973. Since then, he's taught at the University of Bremen in Germany. He was one of the first German critics of chronology, and in 1982 co-founded, together with three others, the Society for the Reconstruction of the History of Humankind and Nature. His first book, The Sumerians Never Existed, is based on clear historical and, above all, stratigraphical facts that shows the history of Mesopotamia and Egypt is 2,000 years too long, the mistakes being due to dates in the Bible. I mean, that's impressive. A lot of people are hearing this kind of thing for the first time and never really considered that there could be this big of a manipulation and it could be this recent in our history. But outside of the English-speaking world and the American bubble, there's a lot of people that seem to be challenging this.
Yes, and it's not a new thing. The new chronology is not a new idea. Before it was known maybe under the name of the artificial 1,000 years. That was a keyword. Many years ago, many people started noticing that 1,000 years are very strange. They couldn't find any buildings that were surely built during these 1,000 years. Also, for 1,000 years, all progress of humanity kind of stopped, even on continents that supposedly developed in complete isolation. Even in the the fabricated American history, there are dodgy 1,000 years.
Yes.
And there were other librarians and other scholars who have been noticing through the centuries that the books of supposedly ancient authors, ancient Greek and Roman authors, were not at all ancient. They were just books written by their contemporary fellows. And this has been going on. Mm-hmm. And this is extremely, extremely important, because these sources are nowadays quoted as something absolutely indisputable.
Right.
On, for example, channels like history channels and so on. And that's where people gather the impression about their history.
It is. And can you explain to us how we get our mainstream story of history? I think most people think of it as an ever-changing culmination of human knowledge, but you talk about this official chronology, which was just established in the 16th and 17th century, as really almost entirely based on the work of this guy, Joseph Scaliger, and a couple of his students. Is that right?
Yes, they compiled this semi-truthful history. There are many grains of truth in it, just it is difficult to find out what is exactly truthful and what is not. And after that, it was imposed as an official history with the power of the authority of the governments. And that's what people, and this is what most people nowadays do not understand. When they see historic documentaries on the famous channels, they think that this is the opinion that is held by the majority of scientists. But this is not the case. This is the opinion of scientists that are allowed to appear on such channels.
Mm-hmm.
There are many even mainstream scientists that hold completely radical opinions. Most people don't even know that many scientists think that actually monkeys evolved from humans.
Whoa.
People rarely hear about that. Well, I'm not saying I support this theory, but there are scientists who have serious reasons to suggest such a hypothesis, and it exists. But people don't hear about it.
Yeah. And so what's the justification for this? I guess at the time, this fake history was created to justify the ruling families that were taking over Europe at the time?
Well, maybe that's from the point of view of the ruling families. Maybe that's how they saw it. But if we have to see it from a higher perspective, who organized all this and who made this master plan and implemented it, holding authority over all these royal families who did the hard work on the ground, so to say, these are different entities that I call parasites in my... I had to coin a new term.
Right.
And I think they're of, how to say, an origin that is not indigenous to our planet.
Right, yeah. It sounds a little bit like the archons of Gnosticism. There seems to be a lot of parallels there.
Yes, to some extent.
Okay, so in the series, you do call these perpetrators the parasites, and you start the story with the ancient advanced civilization of Atlantis saying these parasites came and destroyed the culture from within, leading to the survivors of Atlantis going out to the indigenous cultures and teaching them knowledge and trying to rebuild. What can you tell us about these parasites? Who are they, and do you know where they come from?
Well, that is one topic that I have decided on purpose not to get into in my documentary, because I always tell people when they ask me about aliens and other races, it is best to see it for yourself. There are too many sources online, but I think it is different when one experiences the things firsthand. There are methods for those who are really keen to do it. My path was ayahuasca. Others may take a different path, but I'm not gonna give out details. I think everybody should discover for himself or herself.
Okay, yeah. Ayahuasca I'm fairly familiar with. I haven't got a chance to do it myself, but I have smoked DMT. I know ayahuasca is far different, but can you tell us a little bit about how it ties into this, how it might have helped to flesh out this story for you?
Well, ayahuasca, first of all, gave me the clarity of mind that is required for this research that I have embarked on. Recently, it happened this year that I started doing it on such a scale. And I'm not doing it alone. I'm mostly compiling the work of many other researchers. Now I'll try to organize something of my own, again with the help of the viewers of my YouTube channel. But that requires clarity of mind, and I'm completely different person after I spent this 1.5 year or two in the jungle. I'm thinking in a completely, how to say, my software was upgraded so much because I drank almost every day for a long period and then I stopped drinking. And the difference was just indescribable. First of all, clarity of mind. And second of all, I don't have an official degree in history. And this is very good in my case, because I think the most important qualification now is to be able to rise above all the preloaded information that one gets from school and education. The less one knows about it, the better. Because even we all do it, all alternative history researchers, we take so many things for granted. For example, if you open YouTube, you will find thousands of videos telling you see Sacsayhuaman and all these amazing megaliths in Peru. They have nothing to do with the Incas, because the Incas were primitive. They couldn't do all this. And the conclusion they reach is, okay, there was a civilization, we don't know anything about it, now it has disappeared, and that's where the story ends. But I question even more. I say, but do we really know how were the Incas, and how do we know that? Actually, they believe those mainstream scholars that they have just seen lying to them that there was no ancient civilization, although it's obvious that there was an advanced civilization, so many megaliths and other amazing artifacts. So, first of all, these researchers plainly say the official history is no good, but then they believe it in terms of the stories that it tells them about the Incas. But if we continue pursuing this example, the full history of the kingdom of the Incas is extremely strange. They were always at war on all fronts. Nowadays, we're supposedly more advanced. A nation nowadays wouldn't be able to finance and support so much war on so many fronts with such numbers of population. They were not many, according to this very same mainstream history. So they were all the time at war. They were building at an amazing rate that we cannot replicate with our so-called advanced technology. The full thing is basically a joke. So what I'm saying, it's time to question even more. I don't say the Incas built all these megaliths. I'm saying we don't know at all. There is a chance that the Incas were in connection with the people who built the older megaliths. Yes, we can see that they are older because often on their ruins the Incas built their stuff on top in their typical Inca style. But there are some sites where the level of technology is kind of in between the level of the Incas and the good old megaliths. So I'm pursuing that line of thinking that it is possible that the Incas were in touch with the builders of the old megaliths.
Right, and that is an important point, that a lot of alternative researchers make this case that we apparently were more smart than we are now, and we've devolved ever since then. And the evidence does support that, because with these megalithic sites, the older layers underneath the structures, they seem more detailed and advanced, and the newer layers seem more primitive. And that backs up that idea that we've been slowly going downhill, maybe ever since this point that manipulation took place.
Oh, I think it started much earlier. This manipulation that I'm talking about in the Survivor series is during the last few thousand years. I think it started much earlier, during the time of Atlantis. And both parasites and some good people from Atlantis, they both survived that terrible destruction of the island. So the two parties were there since that time, but in the beginning, the survivors, they knew their history, and this active erasing of history started only in the recent century when people became dumb enough to buy it.
And so in this paradigm, we're putting Atlantis at about 7 to 10,000 years ago. Is that right?
No. At this time, I have no dating for Atlantis. I'm working hard on it. I want to achieve some really scientific results with combined data from remote viewing, past life regressions, and reliable old texts. But for now, no, I wouldn't place Atlantis 7,000 years ago, maybe 20 or 30. But I think 7 is probably you're getting the date of 7,000 years ago. That still is the starting point of some very old calendars, and that was some important battle that the survivors had with, I don't know even whom, somewhere probably in the area of nowadays China. I'm not saying the Chinese people lived there at that time. God knows what race lived there. But that was some important battle somewhere in their saga of being chased by their enemies for many thousands of years.
Gotcha. Okay. And that is another interesting point. In the videos, you talk about Caucasians living in Japan, it seems before the Japanese, and there's some strange things going on there. You talk about waves of survivors coming through. How does this work with the races and these waves and some of this kind of stuff that Caucasians seem to be older, or even that indigenous tribes and peoples seem to have memories or oral traditions of meeting Caucasians earlier than they're supposed to?
Yes, that seems to be a very common pattern all around the world. We see it in Japan. There are some Caucasian mummies in Australia. Of course, so many in Peru. Some, in Africa, at least they have the legends. But since you asked about Japan, initially the Ainu people, that is well known and is not disputed. But what is not well known is that these samurais were actually, they belonged to the Caucasian race. And that's why Fomenko and Nosowski, they visited Japan a number of times. And they were very impressed to see with their own eyes confirmation of their newly discovered history.
Right. You show a picture in the documentary of one of the last remaining samurais, and it's so crazy that he doesn't look anything like what we're shown in the movies about samurais.
Yes, that's in the museum, the local museum where the last group of samurais committed suicide.
So, can you explain a little bit to us about the waves of survivors coming?
Well, I don't know much about it, but a team of anthropologists, absolutely mainstream anthropologists, they did a very hard work, and they noticed that all world cultures, they had kind of 7 waves of art passing through them, or how to say it with better words. There were 7 waves that started somewhere from Europe or Asia and engulfed the world, and that is why we see matching designs in Asia and America, for example. The designs are definitely connected, but officially these cultures developed in a complete isolation. So this group of anthropologists, they reached to these conclusions that these waves exist, but at the end they had to say, but we have no clue how it happened, because these cultures had nothing to do either geographically or in terms of time. They were continents apart and they were thousands of years apart. So it looks like that, but it shouldn't be like that. And that's the dead end they reached. But now from the point of view of the survivors, this has a lot of value. It is the only research that we have for now. I don't know how correct it is, but it is the only one we have so far. Because you asked me specifically about the waves. Well, they're supposed to be 7 of them. And when, how, exactly details, I hope I can discover one day. I don't know more about that yet.
Sure, yeah. I mean, this is a huge undertaking to kind of try to piece all this together in spite of the elite trying very hard to cover it up. You also have talked about talking to indigenous tribes. Is there any kind of insight you've gotten from them firsthand about their oral traditions or stories that don't fit in with the official narrative?
To be honest, I have done a lot of travel. I was lucky. I spent most of my adult life traveling. I'm only now resting since 2 years, finally. I never had that opportunity before. But when I did my travel, I did not record legends or anything like this. I was not actively doing historic research. I gathered other type of wisdom from them. Mostly I saw how they relate to the world a bit differently, and that enriched me in many ways. But I have to be honest, I have not recorded any legends as such. Sometimes, now and then, for example, from the Peruvian jungle on the topic why ayahuasca survived. It is such an amazing thing. It is such a deprogrammer from this matrix that we are put in by force by being born in such a society, and ayahuasca just deprograms you in such a miraculous way. So how could the parasitic forces allow such thing? Well, it happened like this. These tribes, I saw myself because I was there, they live in such an inhospitable environment. The floods are so bad. Few months every year, their houses are just covered with water. In many villages, that is 2-3 meters high. It is just a normal thing. It's not some unusual flooding. And they just take their possessions, which are usually 2 or 3 pieces of clothing and 1 cooking pot per 20 people. And they just go to some hill and make some sort of shed and wait for the floods to finish and get back to their simple homes. So this is a kind of difficult life. There is no infrastructure, and with the advanced ones, it was just too uncomfortable for us and we couldn't reach there. That's why those people could keep the tradition.
Right.
And I was asking them about legends and about ayahuasca, and they told me, no, we are wild people. We didn't have any, that's what they told me. I'm not offending them. This was told to me by Shipibo people. They told me, no, we don't have any culture. We never had any writing even or anything at all. It is the Incas who had all that, but they sent us to these bad places to live with the flooding because we eat people and we are not eligible to become civilized like them.
Oh, man.
And what we know is actually very, very little. It is only the Incas who had this knowledge that you are asking us about. So if the uncivilized people who call themselves uncivilized had ayahuasca, the knowledge of ayahuasca and how to educate themselves with the power of ayahuasca, then I'm asking, what did the Incas have, the educated ones? We can't even imagine.
Right. Man, so a big shocker in this theory is that it seems like our history of different cultures has been stretched out a lot longer than we're told, especially when it comes to a culture like the Egyptians or something. And I think skeptics might have a little trouble with this. How do we throw out things like carbon dating and the fossil record and other methods that we have that give us the story we have today? How can we distrust that kind of science?
Well, we can distrust it by educating ourselves and reading about it. If we spend, let's say, a few days researching all the materials on carbon dating, we'll find what the mainstream scientists themselves say about its reliability and its accuracy. It has accuracy with a range of a few thousand years. That's what they say, but this is not told in the documentaries shown, for example, on the History Channel. Over there, they give you a simplified version. They simply tell you, with carbon dating, it has been established that this happened during the reign of this and this king.
Right.
So you are given a conclusion, but you are not given details of how the experiment, how the actual test was conducted. And usually these tests are not conducted the way they should be. The right manner in which you do a proper carbon dating test is you send a sample absolutely anonymously. Not the way they do it. They attach a tag with the expected result, and surprise, surprise, you are always right. No, there should be no tag attached. It should be completely anonymous. And also, a sample should be sent to few laboratories that should test it independently, because the nature of the tests performed is like this, that they give random results very often. One test cannot be trusted. If you want reliable results, you must have it tested in 4 or 5 laboratories, and the people working in these laboratories should have no clue what are they testing. And then they will give you a range of, let's say, 2,000 years, and that is the actual result.
Mm-hmm.
But these details are, especially the accuracy range, is not explained in the history textbooks. It is not explained in the documentaries that form most people's view on history. Just some year is given, and the people get the wrong impression that there is a test that can give you such an exact dating, but that is not the case. That is just one side of everything, which is the good side. I mean, there is definitely some truth to carbon dating. It is not a complete farce. But the sad part, it is that it depends upon the speed of certain reactions, chemical reactions of the carbon. So what is exactly this speed? The speed with which the carbon changes over time, well, this is unknown, actually. But they have to use some sort of value for this speed to get results for their tests. Otherwise, the equation will be incomplete. You cannot solve an equation when all the parameters are unknown. So how to make it known? They take historic events, the date of which is known for sure, and then they calculate from the test results connected with these events, like the eruption of Vesuvius. They test the organic materials that were buried under this eruption, and all that is with the assumption that Vesuvius erupted this and this year during Roman times. Well, now the problem comes that this is taken as indisputable truth, which is not at all the case. In reality, this volcano erupted probably 300 or 400 years ago. Well, even if it is just a hypothesis that it erupted 300 or 400 years ago, still it is highly questionable that it erupted really in Roman times. But this is one of the main events, the eruption of Vesuvius, that was taken in consideration when the values of the change of carbon were calculated. And the other events that were taken as certain in terms of time when they occurred. They are all, maybe not all, I don't know them all, but at least many of them are highly questionable. So if the events are with questionable time, then the result will be also highly questionable.
Right. I mean, that does make sense. It's like the elite or these parasites, they establish tools that reinforce what they want us to believe. And then any scientists or academics or PhDs who are really trying to do the work, they're dealing with faulty tools. So they come to faulty conclusions. Is that about right?
Yes, and also I am asking what is the problem to just lie about the results? I mean, they have been caught lying so many times.
Yeah, they have been caught lying quite a bit. And you mentioned the Roman Empire. A part of this paradigm suggests that there really was no great Roman Empire, right?
There was something very similar to it. The Roman Empire and many other empires are just reflections of the empire of the survivors, what I call. At some point, the survivors had to withdraw to only certain areas of the planet. In the beginning, they were spreading their culture all over the earth. But when the parasitic influence got stronger, the need of boundaries appeared. And then this country, I don't know how this country called itself, but nowadays we call it with many names, and many of the ancient empires are only reflections, or as Fomenko calls them, phantoms of this great empire.
Right. This is one of the big areas of deception here, is that apparently the story that we're given is just really the story of human warfare and religious warfare. And we're told that we were always fighting and warring, and royalty was just conquering indigenous people everywhere. And it seems like at this time of the Reformation, or maybe slightly beforehand, due to this parasitic influence, the land used to be a lot more communal, I guess. That we used to be a lot more of a united people is what is being suggested here, and that the institution of countries and borders is kind of what created this division, and creating this division was all part of setting up this new control grid. Is that kind of accurate?
Yes, most definitely. If you have an enemy, this is the most elegant way to finish the enemy off. Make the people that you are fighting fight themselves. This is genius, and that's what they have done. We are now killing ourselves. There is no need of external force, and we organize ourselves into wars and all kinds of not very nice activities.
What kind of evidence is there to suggest that we were a more united, more peaceful species before this parasite got in and really did a number on us and really worked to divide us only a couple hundred years ago?
My guess for now is that it got really bad some 1,000 years ago. Before that, I believe it was... the land was common, more communal, as you say. I don't think it's only the last few hundred years. Probably the worst started 1,000 years ago.
Okay.
I can't prove it for now, but this is the general feeling I'm getting. Only now I'm starting to research the older times. Till now, this first season of The Survivors, I don't know if I will make a second one, was concentrated on the recent history. Now I'm turning my attention to the really ancient one, but it seems that the worst started 1,000 years ago, and Christ came 1,000 years ago to try to diminish a bit the evil that will be upon humanity. To some extent.
Yeah, to quote another one of these doubters of the official story that you have in one of your videos, this guy, his name was Edwin Johnson. He died in 1901, but he was a professor of classic literature in New College in South Hampstead, England. he ended up writing a book stating that the Christian church was created in the monasteries of France around 1500. The classical works of the fathers of the church were written by poorly skilled monks. The New Testament followed later, and there are no older texts. And it points to the historic invention of printing. Martin Luther's reform was the first attempt to block the expanding French Catholic Church, and before that, there was no church at all. And that is super interesting to think that, I mean, we're told the year 0 with the Gregorian calendar is kind of where the Roman Catholic Church was established, and to think that from year 0 to 1500 is an invention. They kind of created their own back history.
In general, yes. I don't think the full Christianity was created at that time, but at that time it was twisted. That's my perspective. That earlier, the Christianity was much purer. It was based more truly on the teachings of the actual Christ. And around the time you mentioned, they corrupted the books, mixed them with things that are profoundly not Christian, like encouraging violence and other things in the name of God. I think this is fundamentally not Christian. I don't think this is part of the original teachings of Christ. And at some point, even the very God of Jesus Christ was substituted with another entity. Even the mainstream accepted texts, records of that time, and the scholars were complaining, how come there is such an edition of the Bible? Why are they adding so many things? Why are they adding even a new God? This is a major development. We don't want that. Moreover, this God seems to be very cruel. Mm-hmm. This doesn't look like the God of Jesus Christ. So there were protests. They were recorded in the history, but it's more or less as nowadays we protest against the GMO and so many other things. It is recorded, but little happens.
And to go back to trying to back up this idea that there was a lot more cross-contamination between the cultures and it was a lot friendlier than we're led to believe, apparently there's a lot of Russian artifacts that have religious symbols on them that they shouldn't have. And also Egyptians apparently had some references to interacting with Christians, which is also way different than our official history. What can we gain from those kind of insights? What can you tell us about those anomalous artifacts?
Well, maybe we should stop calling them anomalous. I think they are the normal, actually.
Fair.
What can I say? Full passages of the Bible are written on the ancient, supposedly ancient walls of the Egyptian temples. I don't mean that all of the wonders in Egypt, including the Great Pyramid, was created a few hundred years ago. No, probably there was something even before that. But the demise of the culture happened much later than we are told. That's the main point. It was still thriving during the time of Christ. That is why they suppressed the real dictionary and the real translations of the Egyptian texts. There is such a dictionary, but they said, oh, that's wrong. Why it is wrong? Well, because they say it's wrong. And then they started to looking for some other type of translation. And once they made somebody famous, that is Champollion, he deciphered the hieroglyphs. And they made a big noise about it. And after the full world was convinced by the mass media that Champollion finally deciphered everything, then they started silently admitting, actually the older translations, they were also correct. And now we understand, now that we know the truth. And actually the older translations are same like the newly discovered translations. Everything is the same, just you're not allowed to have Christian stuff on the walls of the Egyptian temples. And many others. There is in this episode about the fabricated history of religion, the supposedly Christian Russian kings, they wear quotes from the Quran on their forehead, inscriptions, and at the same time Islamic and Muslim kings, they mint coins depicting themselves with Christian crosses and other Christian symbols. So I think this shows that things were radically different than we are told they were.
Yeah, and when you talk about Egyptian culture having artifacts where they interact with these Christian groups, another part I thought was really interesting was because it's a very shocking idea that the Egyptian culture is much more recent than thought, but you show a book in the documentary where it is basically the translation, it is the alphabet, and people used to go in through Egypt and do the translations themselves. They'd have the little translator book with them, just like any other culture. If you were to go to Japan before the internet, you'd have a book for translation, and people used to kind of do this themselves, and then that was all stripped away, and Egypt was thrust into the past. But apparently, according to some people who are in this new chronology movement, it was Napoleon who really did the wiping out of the Egyptians. Is that true?
Mm-hmm. Together with Champollion. Yeah, they were players in the same team. Yes.
So to get the timeline right, would we say that Napoleon going to Egypt and destroying that culture was kind of in line with Columbus coming to America and destroying the culture here?
Yes, this was the wave of destruction. We usually call it colonialism. I'm not sure how much the people who were executing the plan on the ground were aware of what they're doing. Probably they had a completely different understanding. Maybe some of them considered it patriotic or religious or whatever explanation they had in their minds, but the overall master plan was to eradicate as much as possible from the artifacts and the historic sites that show connection with the survivors of Hyperborea and Atlantis.
Man, it is so interesting, and it's weird because it's a common thing for alternative researchers who are looking at sites like Göbekli Tepe and ancient Egypt. They look at these sites and they push them back further in history. They admit there's a manipulation, but they push these things back way further than the official record of humanity. But it seems like some of these cultures, we should really be moving them up a little bit.
I don't know about Göbekli Tepe. I think we should not trust any dating at all for now, because even this 10, 12,000 years, that is also mainstream dating. It has no meaning for me at all. I see two distinctly different periods, an older one with the bigger megaliths, and then those walls that connect the older megaliths, they resemble remarkably the Inca work, and they're so much more primitive than the bigger stones. So I think any dating that we don't even know how many periods, during how many eras or civilization was it used. I wouldn't be surprised if the bigger T-shaped megaliths are thousands of years old, and then the rough stonework is hundreds of years old.
Okay, and then like maybe there's a similar parallel with the Egyptians where who knows when it started, it could go back a long, long, long time. But what we're disputing here is the fact that it actually lasted a lot longer than we're told it did, right?
Everything is possible. I don't really try to even date the beginning of ancient Egypt. I can only say at this point that the end was much closer. When was the pyramid built? I have no clue. So the Mamelukes, the last keepers of the Egyptian knowledge, this is topic that really deserves much more attention than it gets. I think this is one of the most interesting episodes of The Survivors.
Mm-hmm. Elaborate on that a little bit for us, if you could.
Well, Mamelukes, many of them were actually blonde people coming from the north, and they were still the ruling class in Egypt a few hundred years ago. Actually, they were respected by the local population, and I think they were connected with the mummies, the Caucasian mummies of pharaohs and other unidentified Caucasian mummies that have been found in Egypt, red-haired, quite tall people. So probably the Mamelukes were their last descendants. There are records that they were Christian, the Mamelukes. Usually people just hear their names and they automatically assume that they were Muslim. They were Muslim towards the end, but they kept their Christian roots for quite a long time. I think the Coptic Christians kept them much longer, but the Mamelukes were probably the descendants of those blonde, tall people whose mummies were found in Egypt. That's why they were tolerated as ruling class, although they were a minority. Obviously, the people must have respected them for some reason. It is an unusual situation that the majority of one country will support ruling class that belongs to a different race. Usually there is a good reason for that. And usually the rulers treat their subjects very well to even remain alive in this situation, few hundred people ruling a few million. And I think the way they're portrayed nowadays as some sort of evil tyrants is absolutely wrong. They were caring, they cared for their subjects, and that's why Egypt did so well before the colonial forces came in.
Man, so for critics who might think this is too wild of an idea, that the Reformation could have really been this effective and it's maybe too big of a cover-up with too many people involved, what can we say to those skeptics to kind of help the case that it is reasonable to believe that the European expansion could really have done all this so effectively?
The only cure for such doubts is to get a hold of volumes of Fomenko's work. Many of them are available in English and they have perfect annotations. Every quotation, the source is given. All these quotes about the Mamelukes, that they were blonde, that they didn't even speak the local language. This is supported by a number of quotes from books that are considered authentic even by mainstream historians. So I think this is the only cure for such skeptics. Reading the books of Fomenko, this is just an interview. I cannot provide all quotes and all sources. This is just to give you an idea. And those who want to see the actual material on which these claims are based, the places, the 7 volumes of the New Chronology.
Right. There is no lack of evidence. I mean, like you said, the New Chronology of Fomenko is 7 volumes. Your documentary series is, I think, 40. It's not like there's no information to go through. There's a ton of evidence, it seems. And I guess if people are wondering, why move these cultures around through history, I guess the reason would be to wipe out the idea of the survivors and to separate these cultures by time so that people don't get the idea that they were actually a peaceful, united planet of civilizations.
Yes, and if people actually become aware how recently we lost our freedom, they will be shocked. And that's the main thing. Now we think that we have been always some sort of feudal slaves for thousands of years. This is not the case. The freedom was lost in recent times.
Right on. Man, so I know we're wrapping up here. As far as the new chronology movement's concerned, how can English-speaking people follow up on this? Of course, there is your series, but is there any further research or any other names you could recommend to people who want to dig in deeper but don't speak Russian?
Well, they are publishing, I don't know where they have reached, but they even started publishing the main 7 volumes for free on their website in a PDF format.
Oh, that's very awesome. I was curious about even trying to get Fomenko on the show, but does he speak English, do you know?
He does speak some English. Well, I've been thinking about asking him for an interview. You should, definitely you should. There is a contact form on his website. Please, this will be very interesting.
Yeah. I'd really want to help further this study and expose it to English-speaking people. This is right up our alley and what we do on the show. Maybe if I can contact him and get in touch, maybe you could translate for us or help facilitate the conversation.
I will definitely do my best, although I'm neither native Russian speaker nor an English native speaker, but I'll do my best.
What other languages do you speak? What's your native language?
I speak, well, now I learned a bit Spanish as well after the jungle, some German, Hindi. I used to know fluent Hindi. Also, I speak Bulgarian. What else? Well, 6 of them now I have here.
Wow.
Well.
Wow. Well,
yeah.
We're going to have to stay in touch. I'm sure this episode will be well received, and hopefully you can help bridge that gap and expose us to some interesting information in other languages and possibly facilitate a conversation. I think that would be great, but really amazing work you do. It is shocking, but you point out so many artifacts that support this case. Very incredible. If people have questions or things they can't work out after watching your series, is there a way they can perhaps contact you, or do you want to avoid that?
Yes, most definitely. I'm making a website, megaliths.org now. It will be a huge database of all the amazing ancient sites, because there is no way to find them, all of them together. For example, there will be section for all the pyramids in the world with interactive map and many other things, and how people can get involved in this research, and of course my contact details.
Very awesome. Well, I hope this draws new attention to your work, and maybe some people will have their paradigm completely changed by this. There's so much we didn't get to touch on. I'd love if we could do it again sometime, but until then, very cool. Take care of yourself and keep doing the good work.
Well, thank you very much for having me on tonight, and I wish to all your viewers enlightenment.